and
Thank you and welcome everybody to Module 4B, where we're going to be looking at the impact on utilities. The situation from our perspective has escalated at Northern Horizons, and I'm going to jump right into it, but I'll take the first 30 seconds just to remind those of you that are watching online that at this point, at the end of the last session, we did get confirmation that the hit on Northern Horizons power generation was indeed a nation-state attack, and it is confirmed as both an incident and a breach. We do have some further information about this, and we'll be trying to piece that together as we receive it and present that to all of you. This module is going to focus on the impact on utilities. Very specifically, we are concerned about how water treatment facilities in particular are dealing with the situation at hand and what the implications will be should this power outage continue. But more importantly, should this attack escalate and hit these facilities, what would the impact be and how should we be preparing at this point? As with every session, I'm joined by leaders from across Canada and North America who will be here. We also have an esteemed technical team from ARMIS that will be joining us alongside Lightbeam and Night Spectre that will be speaking to us about some very specific action items and contextual items that we need to be looking into. I'm joined by two fantastic co-hosts that are helping us as we go through this session. Kelly, I'm going to go to you first. The impact on utilities in light of what we know and what we heard in the last session. Why is this of extreme importance to us at this moment?
Yeah, Ali, I think for utilities, now that we know it's a deliberate attack and the impact has been to the electrical systems, my brain goes next to water and water distribution systems as well as wastewater treatment. And I think that we've all experienced short electrical outages in our home and you realize, oh, we should conserve our water because there's a point where we're not going to be able to get more water into the house or wastewater out of the house. This is now an extreme situation. And we start to think about whether the water treatment to work well together in order to make the solution something that's going to work for the general public.
I think the sharing of resources is something we've heard of quite a bit, but Kelly, I wonder, based on the conversations we've had so far, if that preparedness around sharing is there and if we've actually exercised through this enough to be able to seamlessly run this through. So thank you for that, Kelly. We'll come back to this shortly. Mark, you've got some intelligence on the nature of this attack. I'll turn it over to you just to A, emphasize why this is important, but B, tell our audience a little bit about what we know about the TTPs associated with this incident.
Mm-hmm. So I had mentioned yesterday there's a sharing collaboration across electrical utilities. That's been in place for a few years, and it'll become mandatory in Ontario in October. Fortunately, we're already part of this, and what's been shared with us, which is probably not the whole picture, is that the plant is not operating intentionally. They're choosing not to operate out of caution because they have safety concerns, because it looks like their supply chain has been compromised. So something in their supply chain has been malicious, and they haven't shared more than that at this point. There's tons of things that could be, right? But at this point, they don't think it's safe to operate.
Mark, with your experience in this field and working in it right now, perhaps I'm pushing for too much, but what do you think is the nature of this attack, and how else do you see it escalating?
Yeah, it's all speculation at this point. So it could be something as serious as, so utilities have automation in the field. That's why power outages are usually 1 second, because there's automated rerouting of power and switching that happens. Sometimes without even human intervention. These are complex devices, PLCs, and reclosing devices. And so if there was something intentionally planted in one of those, that could be distributed everywhere, because it could have been done 5 years ago. It could be something inside of their IT network. Like I said earlier, it's not typical that the air gap is real. There are information systems like outage portals that sometimes have two-way communication between OT and IT. And so if there was an IT compromise, it could have bridged somewhere inside of their control room or one of the transformer stations. Or it could be something completely inside of IT that, and I can't speculate as to why there would be a safety concern there, but.
Okay. Well, Mark, we're going to dive deeper into this. What I can say is that right now I have confirmation that we do have a short news report that will especially help those that are watching online with contextualizing this incident and understanding what the specific impact is on these utilities. We'll have the video lined up for you and playing right now, and then once we watch this video, we'll dive a little bit deeper into this incident and the associated impact. The video should be showing up on your screens in the next couple of seconds.
Good evening, and welcome to our special coverage on the nationwide blackout triggered by a cyber breach. Today, utility leaders gathered to address the profound impact of this blackout on essential services. Communities are grappling not only with power outages, but also with water shortages and gas supply issues, highlighting the interconnectedness of utility services. As utility crews work tirelessly to restore services, residents are urged to conserve resources and stay vigilant during this challenging time.
Kush, if I can bring you into this conversation, you heard something at the end of that report that says residents are now being told to be vigilant. And from a water perspective, if everybody knows about, it's popularized quite a bit of what happened in Florida a few years ago. Mm-hmm. I want to be very direct and ask you this. Is this a situation where human lives could be put at risk? And what's a top action item for you right now?
Yeah, at this point, we have to focus on the citizens. I think at this point in time, when we have some evidence believing that it's a nation state, then we have to look at life safety issues, and we have to determine that that people can actually get ill, potentially worse, and we have to really do a thorough investigation before anything is turned back on. So what happens typically is, okay, we've kind of made the announcement, we've found out some information, and now we have to do that deep, thorough investigation on what is actually happening. And then people will start panicking. So we've seen that in COVID, where certain commodities were in high demand, sold out everywhere. And so what'll happen now is as soon as they hear this news telecast, they're going to go out, purchase water from wherever they can, If they cannot purchase water, they'll start purchasing other beverages, like, soda pop, etc. And in circumstances where, because there's no electricity and you can't get into the grocery stores or the convenience stores, we're going to see some behaviors that are not normal to get that water. And then you have to imagine, then you have to take that water and you have to make it home. Because if there's someone else that wants that water, they're going to take it from you. Right? So this is a scenario that can quickly play out.
Bring you into the conversation over here, and I appreciate you taking the time as well. Andrew, from what you're hearing so far, from a technical standpoint and a control standpoint, visibility standpoint, similar to what we discussed in the financial markets, what's top of mind from the Armis lens, and what would you recommend for the leaders in the room to be focused on as action items right now? Yep. I'm not getting through, but just give us a moment. Andrew, just bear with us for a moment. We may not be getting audio throughput from you right now, so just give us about 30 seconds.
So Ali, while we're waiting for that, I think one of the things I wanted to talk about was the financial impact, the economic impact, because we do have the ticker on the screen. And just a reminder for people, when any company or government agency says we don't have time or money to invest in cyber right now, do you have time or money to spend on the actual incident that happens because you didn't take precautions? So just a reminder on that.
Yeah, I made a note in the last talk, last module we were in, that sometimes you can tell if an organization has been hacked by looking at their org chart.
Okay, I can actually comment.
Please, yeah.
On the technical way, actually waiting for Andrew. From a technical point of view, so we can actually, rely on SCADA systems. So, as Mark just mentioned, all these systems are basically automated systems. They all rely on power. And the monitoring side of things, right? So the understanding, the delivering, the water delivered to the actual to the households is going to be affected, and they're only the ones that can actually monitor, how this effect is actually affecting the actual service providing, and that's could actually be a problem, right? Because they are the only ones that have that information. So from a technical point of view, the communication is important, okay? So, we rely a lot into how this communication is going to be distributed. Of course, there is no power. So how do we, how we're going to communicate this to, people, in the population, right? Yeah. So in a normal situation, I can actually talk about experience that I had, similar, no cybersecurity, but there was a flood that affected electricity and water provision to the houses. And we didn't have TV. We didn't have basically a means of communication. We didn't have telephone lines. We didn't have mobile phones. So all we were actually suffering is how, it was affecting us. After 24 hours, so the whole outage was 48 hours. After 24 hours, so we started to panic because our fridges were working, so all our food in the fridges were perishing. And we didn't have water, potable water. So lucky that we already had some storage in our house. But one of the things that basically got us that information was a battery operated radio, so that we can actually understand what was actually happening. Of course, in this situation it was different because we could actually see the water running, and then until that water running was that's a flood was in place, we understood that these services was going to be recovering. So my point here is that technically, so we need to rely on the communications and whatever means of the communication. So we need to prepare the population, in a way of, how they're going to receive that information. Bear in mind that if it's a blackout, we're not going to have, any TV. We're not going to have any mobile phone services. We're not going to have any telephone services. So how are we going to communicate that information, avoiding, what Kush was actually commenting before. So how we're going to avoid people from panicking, and how we're going to communicate that. So again, preparation is important. Helping people to understand that, in a event like this one, we need to have a kit, to be able to pass the communication and avoid that amount of panic that could actually bring in this particular case. That's technically speaking, I guess.
Yeah. Sense, and I want to dive deeper a little bit into the technicalities, and we'll do so very shortly. Mark, a question that from an executive lens is going to come, and from a general perspective will come as well. Is it fair to say that should the power outage, we do have backups, we're still in day 2. If it continues for another few more days, we'll be in a different situation. But should our water treatment facilities also get hit, is there a potential that we may not be able to pump water into residential services and we might be running dry on that front as well?
Yeah, depending on the setup of the regions, we may already be there. So there's a wastewater and water supply system is sort of like a contained loop. We pull water in, we pull water in from sewage, we treat it. That takes time. It's a time-intensive process. It takes multiple days because they use bacteria essentially to break things down. So it's moved from stage to stage, and then eventually it's treated before it's released back out into whatever outlet it is, whether it's a river or a lake or something. So that process is calculated and designed to be right-sized for the population. And then there's of course the supply side, where the water is brought in from the source, and then it is treated and set up, and so it's safe to drink and it's clean and ready. And both of those will be disrupted by this. To what degree there is reserves, there's probably not any reserves on the treatment side. So what will probably start happening is wastewater will be released directly into wherever it was going to go after it was cleaned, but it won't be cleaned. And there's probably no pumping or supply coming in right now. So people, if you had a shower this morning, it was cold probably, but there's a good chance that you didn't.
Prasad, I have another question to ask, and this is something that is top of mind now for all of us, because the long-term impacts, which might happen very shortly, are quite devastating. There's an immediate impact where people can be impacted and poisoned, even in this scenario. But we hold, in our water treatment facility plants, we hold a lot of confidential data. And at this point, one of the things that, and this was brought up by Rhonda earlier on, who brings a municipal perspective, and was also brought up by our folks from CSIS and RCMP, that you may have to resort to manual printouts of all of this data and then going door to door and running it from there. A lot of this data now is sitting in so many different spots in our environment, which could potentially be compromised. What should I be doing right now to ensure that any spots where there's sensitive data, I'm either taking extra precautions or bringing those systems down? Can you give us some insight from your standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most interesting and dangerous topics over here is this may not be an isolated incident. If it's a nation state driven incident, it might be a coordinated incident. We only know what we know right now, but there might be something more going on that we are yet to discover. So what you just talked about earlier, which is sensitive data detection, protection, how do you ensure that you have a proper breach perimeter? Because obviously something got breached over here. How do you figure out what is the breach perimeter over there? How large is the breach perimeter, so that you can then start to get your arms around that breach perimeter and then start taking action which are perhaps in some sense 20th century actions, which is to say we live in the 21st century, which is great, information age and so on. But in incidents like this, it might actually be good to have an air gap plan that you were talking about earlier, Mark, which is to say maybe you need to have a paper-based option that are more difficult to be breached rather than information-based actions, which are much easier to be breached in some sense. So a couple of things just to summarize on that, essentially, would be understanding your breach perimeter would be huge. Making sure that if it is clear that it's a nation-state action, that assuming almost, I would say, that this is not an isolated incident, that is actually probably a first incident in a series of incidents that might be happening, and thereby putting your arms around that, doing a worst-case analysis, and then putting your arms around that, leveraging tools that are perhaps not 21st century, but more 20th century, might be better off in some sense.
Okay. I just want to work with that a little bit more. And George, if I can loop you into this, this is something Mark and I were discussing, and Kelly brought it up as well, is as of now, we have not seen, and unless Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, we've not seen any escalations of this from a government perspective where the threat level has been increased. Should there be actions at this point needed to declare this as an emergency? And how will that help us mobilize the necessary tools and resources that we need to deal with the potential impact we're facing?
Well, the first thing is, one, we're almost at hour 30 of this having occurred. So that means 30 hours, just about, where 70% of the most populous province in the country doesn't have any power at all. And we've also received information that is a nation-state attack that predicated the incident. If that is not an argument to enact the war measures to, or call into play the War Measures Act, I don't know what is.
Right.
So we really at this point should be going all hands. This is a national crisis. And as Mark pointed out earlier, this might only be the initial phase of a multi-tier attack where, based on what they have conceived or through reconnaissance know our SOPs, there's going to be other phases of this attack where other pieces of infrastructure might be destroyed. So at this point in time, not to be alarmist, I'd be sounding red alert. Like, we should be escalating to the max right now.
I do have a response there, but Kush, I want to go to you and then to Amar, and then we'll go to our friends from Armis as well. Kush, go ahead.
So we're at a stage where we're potentially looking at, sounding the alarm. Irrespective of the alarm being sound, we have to mobilize through the government, likely the federal government or provincial government, some shelters for citizens to shelter in if they can't get home, some safe spaces, and also they need to quickly enact distribution of actual water. So they need to go connect with the specific industries, and then get that water and start distributing that water immediately, because that will solve the immediate issue of people panicking. So if they know they can go to their local shelter, get water, it'll calm the waters. So that is something that needs to be enacted quickly, whether there's a declaration of an emergency or not. But we still have to manually, articulate and communicate and send out and distribute the water. So in this case, we'll have to get it from private sector, purchase it, distribute it to the people, and that has to keep going until this is solved.
Okay.
Right.
Amar, I'll come to you, but I do want our audience to understand is that the trickiness of this situation, Mark and Kelly, also comes from the fact that there's a cyber response and an IT sort of digital response to it, but then there's the human response that we've been talking about that falls on our shoulders as well in this situation. You do have emergency preparedness teams for this, but a lot of this is now coming on to us as well, because while our systems are still running, the potential of them going offline any moment and us losing power means that we've got to communicate this as well to the emergency team. So there's a lot at play over here. So for those that are watching, this is the true reality of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with human lives and human risks. So I appreciate you bringing this up. Amar, we'll go to you, and then our folks from Armis, please.
And I just want to go off. I think Kush was reading my notes, but that's okay. The comment about shelters is very important in my opinion. So I had written down here because as the college in the city of Windsor, we're deemed as an evacuation center. So, in an event of these types of emergencies, we have big generators. We would, as long as the diesel is coming, we would have power. We could be the distribution center for water, for food. We can house thousands of people within our buildings. But if the federal government, the provincial government, the municipal government do not work together and enact these things, we don't have that power to just say, hey, come to St. Clair College and we'll feed you or whatever, right? It has to be coordinated. And then, again, it's how do we communicate this? How are we going to tell everybody in our region to say, there's a safe zone if you need something, or if it could be 35 degrees that day Celsius and you need to cool down, you can go to the college because our ACs are still running, at least for now, while we have generator power, right? And then there's, okay, who, from a generator perspective as well, the priority, right? Who's going to get that diesel first? Hospitals, then is it your emergency services and police, EMS, fire, then is it these evacuation centers? So that has to be coordinated, and they have to think about these things, and they have to be ready for it away. And at the 30-hour mark, I think they should be doing this immediately.
Amar, can I ask you a very direct question? And I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I do mean to put you on the spot in this scenario. Has budget been allocated for this, or are you figuring out now at this point, if we have budget, to activate your center as a safe zone?
So truly, when these kinds of things happen, we don't worry about the money. We'll worry about the money later. And again, if this is a federal, provincial, municipal thing, the money will flow. I will give you an example. So COVID, we turned the college into a field hospital, right? And that was funded by the province of Ontario to provide those services because the hospitals were overwhelmed. So we turned our sportsplex 3-gym facility into a field hospital within a week, right? To service. We didn't care about budgets at that point. We were worried about human life.
But you're raising a good point. Someone has to declare that
Yes.
we're in a state of emergency or a state of war. Like, there has to be a declaration to allow all the people who are then in those situations to make decisions. Let's move ahead now and worry about the budget later. They want to be covered, right? Because if they declare it themselves, city by city by city, they're going to start worrying about their job the day after. They know they're doing the right thing, but they want to know that they're supported.
Absolutely, I completely agree. That's why it has to be coordinated, and it has to come from the government to say, we need to do this.
Yeah, a lot of people know what the right thing is to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Kelly, I wonder if there's anything inhibiting folks from declaring that emergency as well. But George, let's hear from you. I believe you had your hand up, and then I want to go to Andrew and the team online.
I have a question for you as host and for everyone at the table. What if instead of a cyber incident, it was actually a bomb that had been planted in one of the major transformers, or a series of transporters and transformers in a coordinated attack? It's a physical attack where the results have led to the same takedown of power.
Yeah.
Do the considerations at that point, when it becomes a physical risk, like we're talking about declarations of war, foreign actor, same thing. I'm saying, like, are we trying to nitpick the problem because we found a cyber incident, or is just what we're caring about is the causal effect on society? Because I think it shouldn't change the conversation, but I'm wondering what you guys think.
Mark, you want to go?
Yeah, I think people think about it differently. I genuinely think that a business would behave differently if someone broke the outside window versus hacked your Wi-Fi. It's just this contextual thing that's just treated differently. And to be honest, so does the ecosystem, right? If someone broke our window, we call the police and they'd show up. If someone attempts to hack my Wi-Fi, I probably won't even get a response when I report it. And that's because the attack can be automated and it can happen, 1,000 times a second, and it's just impossible to deal with it. So I think that even though we were in the exact same spot, because you're right, if we blow up the right amount of equipment, we'd be in the exact same spot right now. It'd be easier to wrap your head around as a person being affected by it, and I think action would have started right away.
I agree with that, and I think I think it's because it's newer, so people aren't sure and they don't want to make a mistake and make a declaration that they regret later. But I also think that until very recently, people view cyber attacks as a technology problem and not as a human problem. And we're starting just very recently to understand the human impact of cyber attacks. And when it's, I think we talked about it yesterday, when it's, millions of customers' data, nobody actually cares. And they want to blame that company. And lots of companies say, I'm glad it wasn't us, I'm glad it was them. And then they go about their business and they don't think about, well, wait, what if it was us? And what if it was the electric? And what if it was the bank? And we don't go there. We go to it's data and they owe money for having the data stolen. So I don't think we're seeing cyber attacks as serious human attacks until very recently.
Jesse, go ahead. Andrew, we've queued you up next. Jesse, please.
Yeah, no, just to add to that, Kelly, I don't think people are still aware of cybersecurity attacks. Like if it comes to, for example, my parents, just talking about that generation, when you talk to them of cyber attacks, they don't understand the complexity, they don't understand what it means, or they don't understand the information they're sharing could be at risk. I think and even getting that information to them is a challenge. So I think the education is not there, and I don't think they understand the bigger risk associated with these attacks. They understand if something blows up, they don't have electricity. They understand that complexity, but I don't think they understand what cyber brings to them as a whole picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, go ahead, Amr.
I just want to add on that because these are all really good points. A cyber attack at the initial, it's kind of invisible to people. There's nothing tangible, so they don't really understand and cling on to it. Like if something was stolen, if a car is stolen, well, there's a car that was stolen, they get it, they see it, they can feel it right away. But on a cyber attack, it's kind of invisible until, oh, wait a minute, someone's got to pay a ransom or something, right? Yep. But in this situation, now everybody's suffering. So that's where it is.
Yeah, I'll add, I echo exactly what Kelly and Mark said, but something we also discussed is that at some point, George, I'm cautious when I use this word, but an act of terror would also have to factor into the conversation. And that's not a narrative you take lightly, and the forces that it can mobilize. And should this genuinely be a nation-state attack, as Mark has confirmed, it will mobilize your adversaries as well. So you have to be very, very specific about this. And maybe I'm acutely sensitive to it, but I think that's one of the reasons you're seeing a little bit of trepidation. Could be wrong, but thank you for this, and let's keep this going. Andrew, I want to bring you into the conversation and sort of get your perspective based on what you're hearing. And if you could also, from your lens, technically, what would you be focusing on right now as action items?
I just read some stuff on Google that a third of the consumption of electricity in Ontario is for water treatment. So this is a really big problem. So the first thing there was that news article said all the updated information was a supply chain is compromised. To me, that's very worrying. If you look at what's happened previously with the solar winds, nearly affected every country around the world. Recently, a couple of weeks ago, probably a week and a half ago, Rockwell, which is the biggest thing for PLCs and other parts in plants like utilities around the world, said don't put them directly on the internet, they get compromised. So if this is like the HMI panels that are controlling the electrical, controlling different utilities, the problem is just not the electricity. If there's you have to understand the threat landscape, and if it's those, like those HMI panels, then you need all utilities and all the different organisations around Canada, around the world, finding those in the landscape and saying, oh, if this is the HMI panel, this is the supply, we need to contain this, we need to do that sort of stuff, right? And if it's a nation state, it's really hard to know if they're out of your environment, right? So normally when we work like international institutions, get the threat actor out, there's a process that we do. But when it comes to nation states, you all have to work together as a big push because you only get really 1 or 2 chances to do that. Otherwise, they find other ways to cement themselves in, protect themselves. Right. So what I'd be doing there is from the supply chain, pivoting onto that. for one side, get some part of the team to do that, to find out what is supply chain, what is the issue, get that vendor escalated to whoever you need to get that whole organisation on the phone and say, what do we need, what's the problem, what's the mitigations we do, what can we put in place. The other part there is the heightened awareness, right? This is a nation statement, right? And it could be, as you said, I'm going to put it as a terrorist attack. So what do we need to mobilise? And this is all hands to the pump. So in organisations like this, everyone comes in, everyone's working as hard as they can to find that, looking for anomalies, looking for types of attacks, looking for things that they didn't worry about before, now worry about now. Right? So some things like, oh, I saw this email, didn't really think about it 2 weeks ago, because when you think of this timeline, this attack had to be coordinated and taken time, right? Right, so it's probably, if you look at organisations today, the average dwell time is anything between 260 to 360 days. So they're already in the organisation, right? So, and there may also be people are paying 10 grand to go do something, flip a switch to put a USB into an organisation. We've seen that with Elon Musk has had like 8 of those attempts in the last year, right? So that we reported. People just put USBs for SpaceX, Tesla cars. So we'd also be looking at insider threat, right? What's it like? Who's been inside, who's been accessing systems you're not normally access. So going through those hidden anomalies. And when we talk about the physical versus cyber, the difference I see with the transformer, the great thing is when I say great thing is that when the transformer is taken down, you know how long it's going to take before you get that transformer. How long it's going to be, it could be 1 week to get the transformer, 2 weeks to put it in. So, okay, we're going for 3 weeks. But with cyber, you don't know if they're out. And if they put another back door in and numerous back doors into the different systems, we think they're out, and then we think that everyone's happy, and then suddenly 2 days later, we're in the same fire we were before. So I don't know.
Michael, I appreciate that, and sorry, Andrew, I appreciate that. Michael, if I can come to you, and I'm going to ask something which has been on top of our minds, but I'm going to target it at you. Given the tool stack that you use, and your colleague mentioned dwell time, is there any reason why, if there was this attacker in our environment, is there any reason why we would have missed this attacker being inside there? We would have missed some of their activities. What were we not looking at that has resulted in this, potentially?
Potentially, we're going to look at it as two separate things that caused misses. Is the threat actor knows your environment much better than you actually do, which comes back to understanding what assets you have and the baseline of activities of what's supposed to be. So when the threat actor is actually in your environment and has stayed dormant, they either have extremely great skill set to do that and have been working on this process for quite some time to actually build this campaign to compromise and act upon the objective that they're doing, or they're very skilled and they just know your environment well enough to know what you're looking for and what you're not looking for. And that's ultimately what it comes down to, is they know your environment better than you do.
So I'm going to work with that. And Prasad, Jesse, go ahead, please.
Just want to add another thing. It could potentially be an internal threat, or somebody that's inside your organization that's working with these external attackers.
Yeah, that's exactly where this conversation was headed to. Prasad, if I can loop you in over here, your focus and your expertise at this table is around data and compliance frameworks, around the data that we have. From an insider threat perspective, what should we be looking at this point? Because we're trusting everyone with the data that we have out there. We're trusting everyone with these systems. Is there anything from your tooling standpoint that we could action, even albeit at this moment, to mitigate the insider situation we might be facing?
Yeah, just to add to your point, a new employee, when they join an organization, public, private, or otherwise, they have access to on an average 6 million documents on day one. You're trusting a new employee who is just there with 6 million documents access on day one. And so the challenge really is, even though you can do a number of things around access control, the problem is that people change their roles. Actually, it's much easier to control data exfiltration when people are leaving an organization, because most organizations have that under control. But when I move from Department A to Department B, there are super low bars and barriers, unfortunately, around information protection, because you're still there. The problem is that now you were probably working in some marketing department, and now you're working in HR, as an example. You have access to lots and lots of sensitive data, and all of a sudden, the threat perception, the insider risk perception, because of that lateral movement, which most IT and security organizations generally don't care about, or don't care about as much, is huge and humongous. Is more than actually employees leaving organizations. So generally, the other kind of challenge is that environments are always dynamic in nature, not static. So the only way, I guess one of the most interesting ways we have seen this being solved at public and private organizations, is your threat defense has to be dynamic as well. As dynamic, it has to move with your employees. It has to move with an identity. If Jane Doe was a part of marketing and tomorrow she becomes part of HR, the insider risk mitigation plan cannot be just at a department level. It has to be an identity or an individual level. That's the only way. It has to follow, just like just like a swarm of rules and compliance regulations. It has to follow the employee wherever that employee might go.
Please go ahead.
The complexity from an operational perspective is that we normally have legacy systems that have flat networks, and that actually caused us to nightmare, because to actually move an employee from being an engineer to being in the executive team or something like that's actually to move the roles from one part to another one is actually very hard, because we might not even have an active directory to do it, right? So why actually, from an operational perspective, if we're not following the compliances or the frameworks to guide us throughout the cybersecurity journey, that could actually be a problem, right? And given the situation that we are dealing with today, so that potentially could be an open slate for someone to gain access to a system and have access to everything, especially when it comes to control systems where the industrial control systems devices themselves, PLCs for instance, they don't even have a way to authenticate. If you have access to a machine with the engineering tools, you have access to changing the operational program for the automation system, especially in an energy system or utilities and so forth.
Andrew, if I can ask you, at this point, the attacker has taken power out. We are investigating and waiting to see should this escalate in any way. From your perspective and what you've heard, limited information albeit, do you suspect that a ransomware ask is next? Do you suspect that more lateral attacks are going to happen? What would you typically envision to be the next modus operandi for this attacker?
Yeah, I'd also throw this to Michael as well. He talked about the competing hypothesis, right? To step back and think through the problem, think through the attacker. If this was a ransomware, this would be send an email.
So guys, just give us a moment there, Andrew. We seem to have a little bit of difficulty getting you back into your audio. But Kelly, if I can just ask you at this point, are you nervous about where this is moving and the lack of visibility that we have?
Yeah, I'm very nervous, and I personal opinion, I don't think this is a ransom request coming. I think this is a situation where someone's trying to do damage, to take control, and to impact human lives on purpose, and I don't think they're done.
Andrew, your thoughts?
Yeah, can you hear me? Mine's still on mute there. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I said that this is also a good one for Michael because, he talked about the competing hypotheses, right? So my thing there, if this was a ransomware, they would just send an email, compromise, this is a long-term play, right? So for me, this is a bigger action on objectives. right? So whether we don't understand the strategic objectives, whether they just want to take out Canada, right? Or they want to play a bigger game where they can multi-hop through different connections from different governments and different organizations, like, for example, one bank to another bank or one electricity company to another one, right? And start make a cascading fail across, the different objectives are after, right? So to me, a ransomware, this would be done and dusted. A nation state's not going to spend all the money because do they need the money, right? And how are they going to get the money out if they go, send it all to this Bitcoin, right? So it's definitely something that's, a bigger objective, action objective.
Michael, anything you want to add to what was shared?
No, agreed. Looking at the facts that we have, as well as a particular analysis that we have in the competing hypothesis, is definitely not going to be a ransomware component. It is going to be a larger campaign with a lot more damage that will happen to both infrastructure and to human life, as well as the psychological component that would be instituted or compelled. You take a look at the lack of electricity, humans can act on that in a civilized manner for 3 to 5 days with no real issues. Lack of water, it's a day or two before you're going to have civil issues. And that seems to be what the nation-state actor is going after.
Thank you. Mark, I'm going to put you onto the spot here because it's racing through my mind, but I'm not sure if this is an action that we should be taking. At this point, the utilities, let's focus on the water treatment facilities. They haven't been hit yet. I mean, they're suffering and will suffer more because of the power outage. But they haven't been hit from a security perspective, a digital perspective. The looming threat that it might happen. At this situation, do you recommend taking certain systems within their SCADA environments, etc., offline, or maintain normal operations, albeit under backup?
Yeah, it's a pretty tough decision, although the service delivery can't get worse. There's literally nothing right now. I was to guess that's probably what they're doing. They probably want to, if they've identified the scope, the perimeter of the breach, and they would be removing the affected systems, which may have been modified by internal staff, may have showed up that way in a multi-step of, putting it together, whether it's code or a physical asset, we don't know yet. But that's probably part to one of the questions you asked earlier is how did no one notice? Well, if the thing shows up brand new and that's your baseline, then it's not going to look like it's acting weird, or that its behavior suddenly changed. So I think the priority at this point would be, back to the 20th century comment, how did we do things before computers? Let's just do it that way for now to get things back up and running, if that's even possible at this point, because we don't know if there's been damage to physical assets, making that impossible. But I'm sure that's what people are doing, right? We're coming into almost day 3 now.
Yeah.
And we've probably got some people run ragged and trying to make quick decisions, and I'd expect that they've already worked with higher levels of government, and we're just not hearing the whole story.
Kush, while you answer, I do also want to put you on the spot here and ask a tough situation, and that is, if you were in this position to make that, are you comfortable hearing what you heard in the previous module where Sunil made it very clear that there should be repercussions for the decisions that we make and what we do and do not do as security leaders? Are you willing to make a decision of this nature to take certain systems offline and cause even further discrepancies in service and cause even further difficulties to citizens? If you can tackle that as well as the comment that you wanted to make.
Yeah, sure. I think at this point in time, with the given facts, me personally, I would encourage the powers to be to take the systems offline, because there's no water pumping. There's no water being distributed. People are in the streets looking for water. There's no shelters. There's no water distribution by any government at this point in time. And so I think we need to do the investigation from a cyber perspective and IT perspective. So at this point in time, with the given facts, and we know it's nation state, there's no water coming in and out. Shutting down the system is not going to change that fact. The water, whether it's off or on, is still not pumping. Secondly, earlier you talked about tooling, right? So I think we need to, before the power goes completely out with the backup generators, we definitely need to look at running as many tools as possible to get as many clues as possible. And one of those tool sets are the data protection tool sets. So if we could run quick scans that are not only looking for sensitive information, sensitive emails, but also scanning and looking at specific images that might have been sent by a nation state to one of the employees. We talked about insider threat. I think it's an extremely valuable exercise to do before the generators go off and we absolutely have no power in our SOC. So with that, we might find some additional breadcrumbs which are outside of the traditional, defense and response tools.
If I may.
Yeah, please, Carlos.
Sorry, if I may, I will probably consider not taking the systems offline, but isolating as much as possible. I know it requires a lot of understanding, the connectivity across, for instance, a treatment plant. So we still need to continue on in the long term to provide or supply water, right? So that if we actually stop producing water and we take the system offline, so what happens when everything comes back to normal, and how we can actually recover from providing and supplying to the population, right? So instead, I would suggest to isolate the systems, and for that we need to understand how they are connected. Continue, storing water, producing it, and at least just to have a source where we can actually rely on if we have to manually distribute these with tankers or whatever. That's my 2 cents, my recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll go to Roosbay and then I'll queue up Andrew as well. Roosbay, go ahead, please.
What Carlos just mentioned, at the outset of the attack, and as we know this is happening, I agree that probably not necessarily take systems down, but putting extra focus on, and this is as water is still pumping, putting extra focus on systems that keep water safe and maintain water quality. I think I would focus on that. Not having water is one thing, having polluted or potentially water carrying pathogens to population is quite a different thing. I would also prepare at the outset for a case where we have to isolate systems. Mark mentioned yesterday, having people out in the field that are typically not field operators or not comfortable, or sorry, they're not in the day-to-day operation today to be in the field and managing systems. If they have to go in and start interacting with systems in the field manually, having the break glass mechanism, the fire IDs ready at hand, printed, distributed, having that preparation at the outset of the attack, I think is quite important.
Roosbay, I'm going to come back to this point because there's a closing sort of comment that I want to make, especially related to insider threats. So we'll get to that. But Andrew, I know you wanted to chime in, so I'm going to ask you to unmute and go ahead.
Yeah, I was just backing up Carlos and crew. The same view is that take one little treatment offline and then go through it. Find a tooth comb, go through the environment, and then put different boundaries on boundary groups to make sure the firewalls and all that's configured, and then check if it's doing any talk back to possible nation state C2 channels and that sort of stuff. Because there's so much traffic in logs today. We're talking terabytes, like where I was before the Fortune 100. We had 56 terabytes a day trying to find the bad stuff in, right? So a lot of data. If we bring those different zones on and see something that's not normal going out, you may find that easier in that environment, then bring that on and then secure it more, put all the security features you got. Everyone's got lots of products and we don't put every feature on, but this is the time where it's saying, hey, let's put that heightened alert. We're DEFCON 3, right? Whichever one want to play it. And then when you say we've got a bill of health, this one, then do it to your next treatment plan, right? And the same thing there with electricity, and same thing there. Banking's slightly different. They work a different way, but they'll go through that same similar sort of process. But when it comes to utilities, when you spin something up, you know, and if it's possible nation state's been compromised, you usually see some sort of back channel talk, right? Because it wants to do a connection for that to go talk to. Now, on the insider threat, I would say, hey, take only the small number of people that you trust, that you've had trusted for a long time, into that environment, right? And do that part. So clear other people out, get it to work again, and then start putting that access control to say only these specific people can go to these systems, could go physical, do those sort of things as well. Because they come back and put a USB in again or something like that, then you're gone again, right? So it's going through that in a methodical process, and we need to do that. You need to do that probably every day, right? Or every, you know, and if you've got a new alert or new process, then go and do that again, right? Because this is a big cycle until you get that push of the nation state.
Thank you for that perspective. We're coming close. We've got about 3 minutes to go. Prasad and then Carlos. I have a question which I was holding back for some time, but at this point of this operation, I think it's fair that I bring it up. We've been talking a lot right now about insider threats, and we're seeing ourselves as a trusted circle discussing all of this information. With all due respect, as a partner, as a service provider, as a vendor, in this situation, how can I, if I'm in charge of the situation and protecting the utility systems, how can I trust that you too are not impacted by this in any way?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? And we have been talking about the tech element and the human element, obviously, but in a situation like this, there is also a political element. The political element of, you know, politicians, they want to get to continuity quickly. The political element around CISOs within organizations who want to make sure that their team is properly protected, and at this time it is actually the worst time to trust new people, new teams. So the idea over there would be to say, work with people, technologies, teams, vendors, if you have to, who you have been working with before for quite some time. This is not necessarily the time to bring new players, because they will bring risk to your environment in a very dynamic, very fluid environment. Work with people, which is why I suspect discussions, events, conferences, what we loosely call as networking, but I mean that in a positive way, is super important, because people around this table, now we know each other, we can develop that relationship and be prepared, be trusted when something like this were to happen.
Okay. Carlos, if I can rephrase this question just a bit, and a little bit of perspective from you, keeping in mind we have about 3 minutes. What actions are you taking in your corporate environment as well, and your service delivery environment, to ensure that we have trust in the security of your services as well? And I recognize that there is a political element to all of this. The source of where a vendor comes from, where their tool stack is located, where their talent is located, might also be a source of attack. So some perspective there.
So unfortunately, you can't really trust anyone, right? So, and from an operational perspective, so there are VPNs that connect directly to the systems to do maintenance, to do monitoring, to do even configuration, and you can't really effectively monitor what these vendors are doing on the other side, right? So you can't really trust them. So instead, what we're actually working on is zero trust concepts, where we provide access, limited access, time-based access, role access-based security, and that's actually the kind of and I know it's probably if we don't have it today, so obviously we can't really establish it during an incident, right? But for me, it's more the proactive approach, and the proactive approach is, providing these zero trust concepts into accessing, critical infrastructure like utilities, like power generation, and these concepts are actually quite important because, again, I don't trust VPNs, okay? Because again, we don't have, a way to control who is accessing, devices connecting to my network. Yeah. However, if we have a zero trust concept and we have a secure remote access, so that we can have from logging what activities they're doing to even recording of what activities they're doing while they're doing any maintenance or configuration. So from that point of view, unless you have a system, that type of systems in place, you can't really trust vendors or anyone that is actually accessing your operational network.
Okay, I think Andrew, I believe you wanted to add a quick note to this. I'll cue you up if you can unmute and go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah. So I was just adding to Carlos that, I don't know if you saw like last week Snowflake, right? Compromise, and that's like the amount of data every organization has in Snowflake is huge. Right, so every organization, every supplier, every vendor has some vulnerabilities in there, right? So my thing there is what's important from a security architecture point of view. When you put that technology in, you need to put checks and balances in for the organization. Like for Armis, it's like when it sends that collected data up after it's made a small number of that data, that it can only go to Armis. Right? So if someone changed the location and put it to some nation state C2 channel, they're getting information, right? So for every vendor in there, you need to look at from a security architecture, where is it sending the data, what's it doing with the data, and what other risks can it do? Like there's, if you look at an EDR tool today, you can run a script on every machine in an EDR. If you own the console, you can own everyone, right? So even though the EDRs do a great job today detecting malware, viruses, C2 channels, all that sort of stuff, but if you use it in the wrong way, so once again, go through security architecture what you have and put defense in depth, but belts and braces, right? So this should never do this, but like a tripwire, if it does this, then alert everyone, right? And I recommend everyone put that sort of technology and those sort of belt and braces around what they have, because then it makes it say, this is not functioning the way it should. So, and we're seeing, as you said, we're seeing 60% of all compromises from organizations are known vulnerabilities, right? So people aren't getting ahead of what those known vulnerabilities are. And the other 22% at the moment is supply chain, right? So, and if you look at big organizations like a retailer we work with, they have 38,000 suppliers, right? Supply chain, right? So securing all the supply chain is a really hard problem. Right, so those parts there, we're going to see more and more industry to help out on that, and what we need to protect supply chain. But the problem is a big problem, and it's one of the many problems we still need to solve in cyber.
Problem is indeed a very big problem. We are at the top of our time, so very quickly, Mark, 2 key takeaways.
Yeah, the first one is that, to much of what Andrew just said, everyone at this table almost certainly has some vulnerability that is currently not unpatched and that you know about, because we're not running at a pace where we're doing, and if you've, again, to what Sunil said, if you figured it out, let me know, because that's true for me too. And so what that does is it sets us up where if someone wanted to do what we're simulating right now, it would work. They would be able to do it. They just haven't done it yet. Someone hasn't decided to do it yet. It almost certainly will happen eventually, and we could have stopped it, but we are not putting in enough priority towards these efforts. It's just a reality of business as usual. Yep. And the second point that I had, there's municipalities conduct emergency operations center events. They're legislated to, so that's why they do it. I'm not saying they wouldn't do it otherwise, but they all do it because they have to. And I did a exercise a few years ago that was similar to the outcome here, but essentially it was a concentrated chemical spill that was upline from where the water was ingested. And so they, of course, turned it off. And in that simulation, what happened, which is realistic, is that the sudden pressure drop actually caused some of the supply pipes to collapse. So now you've destroyed infrastructure that will take, years to fix. And so that's the consequences can be really severe. And this is just, we're not patching stuff.
Yeah, and I think that ties to the economic impact as well. Thank you, Mark. Kelly, closing 2 takeaways.
Yeah, I would say for every company, document your assumptions that you believe will be in place if you're in the middle of a cyber attack. So your assumption is you'll be able to get your people. Your assumption is that you'll follow your business continuity plan. What assumptions are in there? That you'll have access to computers, that you'll have access to people, that you'll have access to communications. So document those assumptions, and then test those assumptions if they are not going to be true in the middle of the situation, and then fill those gaps.
Thank you very much, Kelly, and thank you to all the leaders that joined in this evolving scenario that we find ourselves in. Thank you to our online viewers and the team for putting this session together. We'll have a quick break, then another demo for a tool, and then a couple of other sessions, including an emergency preparedness walkthrough, and then the close for the day. Thank you all for joining, and I will see you very, very shortly.